Chapter 1. Introduction to Pest Management Learning Objectives. After study of the material in this chapter, you should be able to 1. List 4 basic principles of integrated pest management. 2. Name 4 tools or techniques that you could use to study a plant problem as you look for pests. 3. Describe strategies that delay development of pesticide resistance. Terms to know: IPM threshold indicator, plant particle drift, vapor drift buffer, re-entry period, pesticide resistance, phytotoxicity, pesticide breakdown. Chapter 1. Introduction to Pest Management in Toughgrass and Ornamentals. Turf and ornamental plant care professionals need to know about integrated pest management. IPM is a way of looking at all the topics related to pest control in an organized way. In other words, IPM combines appropriate pest control tactics into a single plan to reduce pests and their damage to an acceptable level. Basic principles of integrated pest management: produce healthy plants that resist pests. This means selecting healthy plants, using certified seed, providing good growing conditions, and making a good match between the plant and the site. Tough grass, for example, will not do very well in shade. Become familiar with the recommendations for cultural methods of pest control described in chapters 2 and 6 and in the chapters about weeds, insects, and diseases. Identify the problem. Always find out whether the damage to a particular plant is caused by a pest or by an environmental condition such as freezing or drought. And always determine the exact pest you are dealing with. Even closely related pests may need different action strategies. Guides to weeds, insects, and diseases are listed in the resources section at the end of each chapter. Cooperative Extension Service staff members are often able to help identify an unknown pest. Expect some pests and tolerate some damage. No landscape is ever totally free of potential pests, but a small number of pests may not cause enough damage to justify spending money on treatment. Deciding how many pests and how much damage to tolerate is more difficult for ornamentals and turf than it is for field crops. With a field crop, it is often possible to set an economic threshold for pests. If you can predict how much yield will be lost to a certain number of insects or weeds, you will know whether the cost of pesticides can be justified. Except in nurseries and commercial sod production facilities, damage to ornamentals and toughgrass is related to appearance rather than income, so the threshold for pesticide use depends on the client's preferences, the value and/or visibility of the plants, and other factors. Use pesticides only when needed. An IPM user usually treats observed problems instead of applying pesticides on a routine schedule. Pesticides are labeled for use only on specific pests and types of plants. Using a pesticide on a site not listed on the label is illegal. If an infestation is small, a spot treatment may be used just on the affected area or the infested plants. Using pesticides less often is safer for the applicator and the environment and will slow the development of pesticide resistance. However, some products are intended to be used to prevent problems. Before applying one of these, you need to be fairly certain that a weed, insect, or disease problem would be unavoidable without its use. What's the problem? Most chapters in this manual describe common weeds, insects, and diseases of toughgrass and ornamentals. Here are some general tips for diagnosing problems, finding pests, and carrying out the regular scouting or monitoring that will help you find problems at an early stage when treatment is most likely to be successful. Learn about symptoms. When you see damage to a plant, you will need to find out whether the damage is caused by a pest, a cultural problem, or an environmental condition like freezing or drought. Before you can take action against an insect, disease, or weed, you need to know exactly what the pest is. Different diseases and insects can cause similar symptoms. Yellow leaves, leaf spots, wilting, and rotting roots may be caused by different diseases and insects. Don't leap to a quick conclusion. Study every situation carefully and seek advice if you are not sure what the problem is. Use a hand lens. Most insects and mites are smaller than house flies. A hand lens will help you to see and identify tiny pests such as scales and mites. Choose a lens of at least 5 power but no more than 10 power. Carry an index card. Tiny mites on junipers and other evergreens can be found by tapping the leaves against a white index card several times. If mites are present, you will see them crawling around on the card. Recognize indicator plants. Some landscape plants can indicate the onset of a pest infestation. These are typically the first plants to be affected by a pest. Keep notes about where infested plants are found and the degree of infestation. You can then revisit these indicator plants to find out if there is a change in the number of pests or if a treatment is working. For example, Japanese beetles feed on a multitude of host plants, but rose plants are a favored host and a good indicator plant for their presence. Keep records. Keep notes on each visit to a site. A map or drawing of the site will also be helpful. Records made in past years should tell you where and when problems occurred so that you will know where and when to look first during the current season. Records will help you learn which treatments are effective. They can also help you comply with pesticide regulations. Action choices. Once you are sure that plant symptoms are caused by a specific pest that now requires action, you need to consider different control options, safety, and cost. New products for pest control are heavily promoted every year, but it is a good idea to get an opinion about their effectiveness from an independent source such as the Cooperative Extension Service. Before applying any product, review the cultural requirements for the damaged plant. No amount of pesticide treatment will cure a plant that is under constant stress from being in the wrong place or getting too little water or too much fertilizer. Many homeowners now ask if you can use a biological control instead of a chemical pesticide. Biological controls use living natural enemies to control pests. In the southeast, biological control is used mostly for insect and mite pests. Bacteria, fungi, insects, mites, and nematodes are all available for biological control of different pests. Not all of the biological control agents on the market are effective, but some work well. More information on biological control is given in the chapters of this manual on insect pests. Pesticide application and mixing. Drift is the movement of pesticides through the air away from the target site of application. There are two kinds of drift: particle drift and vapor drift. Particle drift is the movement of fine particles through the air while the pesticide is being applied. Vapor drift is the movement of the pesticide in the form of a gas or vapor during or after application. When you apply pesticides, you need to minimize pesticide drift. Choose pesticides that are least toxic to non-target plants and animals and follow the directions provided in the core manual and on the pesticide label to help minimize drift. You can shield a susceptible plant with a piece of cardboard or remove potted plants from the area. Do not apply pesticides in places where pesticide particles or vapors will be drawn into heating, cooling, or ventilation systems. Maintain a buffer zone between the area to be treated and sensitive areas such as ponds, streams, wells, and drains. People, pets, and places. Take precautions to prevent pesticide exposure to people, pets, and wildlife. Remove toys, pet food dishes, bird feeders, and lawn furniture from the site before applying a pesticide. Do not use pesticides when people or pets cannot be kept away from the site during the re-entry period specified on the label. The re-entry period is the length of time that must pass before anyone can enter a treated area. If the re-entry period is not specified on the label, make sure that the treated surface is dry before allowing re-entry. This is also true for pesticides that need to be watered in after application. Be careful to clean up pesticide and/or fertilizer granules that have fallen on paved or cement surfaces. Blow or sweep them back onto turf or plant beds so that they do not get picked up by bare feet or pets or stuck in shoes and tracked into the house. Pesticide applications should be scheduled well before sporting events or other activities involving the public. Applications at or near schools and child care facilities should not be made when children are present. Resistance. When the same pesticide is used repeatedly for the same pest, it may lose its effectiveness. You need to know something about the pest life cycle to know how long to use the same product or type of product. To slow the development of resistance, use a pesticide only when needed and choose alternative pesticides from different chemical classes. Goosegrass, chinch bugs, the boxwood leaf miner, and downy mildew of roses are pests that have become resistant to some pesticides. Tank mixes combining 2 or more pesticides or a pesticide and fertilizer in your spray tank is called tank mixing. Tank mixes are legal if they are not prohibited on the directions for use section of the label, but combinations of some active ingredients can cause plant damage or phytotoxicity. Even when a tank mix includes active ingredients at the labeled concentration, the double dose of emulsifiers and additives in the tank mix may damage plants. In some cases, mixing chemicals together may cancel their effectiveness. In other cases, some products may be more effective when they are applied together. Before you use a new tank mix, seek advice from the Cooperative Extension Service or others with experience in the field. Formulation effects: emulsifiable concentrates are more likely to burn plants than wettable powders or flowable formulations. However, wettable powders and flowable formulations are more likely to leave a residue that will be noticeable after the spray dries and that may upset users of the landscape. In general, liquid formulations seem to perform better for control of above-ground pests. Liquids or granulars work on below-ground pests. Granulars are probably better for sites that cannot be irrigated soon after the application. Pesticide breakdown: bacteria and fungi in the soil naturally break down most pesticides into non-toxic substances. In some cases, these microbes have become abundant enough to degrade some pesticides very rapidly. The result is a loss of control because the pesticide is not around long enough to be effective. This fast breakdown occurs most commonly when the same pesticide is used several times during the same season. When the same pesticide is used over and over, the microbes that have learned how to degrade one pesticide may be able to degrade several related pesticides. Test your knowledge. 1. Resistance to pesticides comes from A. Using the same pesticides over and over. B. Applying pesticides at the wrong time of year. C. Applying too much pesticide at a time. D. Applying pesticides to plants that are too dry. 2. Pesticides in the soil A. Never go away. B. Are eventually broken down by bacteria and fungi. C. Have the same effect as fertilizer. D. Are harmless to beneficial insects. 3. You should apply a pesticide A. Based on the calendar date. B. As soon as you see the first pest. C. When pests are abundant enough to cause unacceptable damage. D. Every 10 days during the growing season. 4. What hand lens magnification is recommended for insect identification? A. Less than 3 power. B. 5 power to 10 power. C. At least 10 power. D. The highest power you can find. 5. In an IPM program you should A. Control all the insects you see. B. Produce healthy plants that can resist pests. C. Rely totally on natural biological control. D. Never use chemical control. 6. Which of these statements is true? A. It is legal to use an insecticide on any plant to control insects. B. Different diseases and insects can cause the same symptoms. C. Yellow leaves are always a sign of disease. D. It is safe to use a broad-spectrum herbicide on plants not listed on the label. 7. Which of these statements is false? A. Records are helpful in knowing when to year. B. Records are a way to know whether a treatment was effective. C. Record keeping takes more time than it's worth. D. Record keeping helps you comply with pesticide regulations. Answers: 1A, 2B, 3C, 4B, 5B, 6B, 7C.